Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Honest HR Nitrous again for the second time in one day. This is the live stream I do a couple of times a week. Actually, 3 times a week now. That's the new schedule where we talk about it's basically a live Q&A. So I don't really have anything I prepare to say. I'm just here answering your questions. So get in the chat. If you are a subscriber to my channel and have been so for any amount of time, you should be able to see the chat box. Get in the chat box. Let me know what you're wondering about, what you're struggling with, and we can get into it. The title of this stream is episode 161. 161 is called Exit Interviews. Beware, don't do them. So we can kick things off by talking about that, and then just it's a free-for-all for questions. Anything related to job search, careers, networking, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I think you guys know the drill. We're going to talk about this. Oh, and one thing before I forget, special shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members, which is the right direction. There you go. And my Patreons and my super thanks donors, you guys are awesome. And viewers and participants, you guys are awesome too. Okay, let's get on with this. So exit interviews, you guys might know about this stuff before. You might have heard of this. It's kind of an open secret that, a lot of people recommend that you don't do them. I kind of agree, especially if you're not really leaving on great terms. I think it's, there's no real upside for you to do these, and there's a lot of risk involved, especially if you don't think you'll be able to keep a civil tongue if they ask you about like why you're leaving and what do you think of the company, what do you think of your boss, and all this kind of stuff. You absolutely do not want to do these. A great way of getting out of it is just stalling, like the passive aggressive thing where you just say, well, I don't have time now, or I don't have time today. I'm finishing up some stuff, but maybe tomorrow, and then whoops, it's time for me to go. Sorry, that kind of thing. That's probably the best way to get out of it. Minimize the conflict with other people. Yeah, but you really don't want to do these. It is not, there is no advantage to you in doing them, and there's quite a lot of risk. Everything you say to the HR department, whether or not they tell you that it's confidential, it isn't confidential. They, just in case this isn't self-evident, they work for the company. They work for the organization. So they have no loyalty to you. They work for the organization. Their entire purpose is to manage employees. That's what they're there for. Any concern or any issue that deals with employees, that's the HR department. That's what they're there for. Just like anything that deals with customers before they bought anything, that goes to the sales department. Customers, after they bought something, then usually that goes to the customer service department, right? So anything to do with employees, that's HR. So they're involved in disciplinary procedures. They're involved in conflict resolution and disputes and all this kind of stuff. And they also do, apart from hiring, they also do exit interviews. It's kind of like the opposite of hiring, where somebody is leaving. But what they basically do is they ask you like, why are you leaving and all this kind of stuff. Now, the first thing you should never disclose is where you're going, because although this is rare, it has been known that an organization that you're leaving can sabotage the job that you're going to. That has been known. So if they know precisely where you're going, who you're reporting to, maybe what your contact person is to get that second job, it has been known that they can call up these people, call up your contact, call up your boss to be, and sabotage you by saying something along the lines of, hello, I understand you're hiring this person. I work for the organization that they are just leaving right now to go to work for you. I think it's only fair that you should know that we've had tremendous problems with this person. There's been issues of, drinking on the job. There's been harassment and violence in the workplace. There's been, whatever. They can say anything under the sun. They can always deny it later and essentially get away with it, unfortunately. And the end result is that your job offer that, you're relying on with the second company, it might dry up. They might call you and say, it looks like we won't be needing you after all, so we are rescinding our offer. So, don't tell them where you're going. Don't tell them why you're going. And the other thing is that it's kind of a moot point anyway, because let's pretend that you were leaving because of a conflict with your boss or coworkers or whatever, company policy. What are the odds that what you say on the way out the door to HR is really going to trigger full and complete change? Very, very slim chance. Usually it doesn't. If it's a toxic environment, it's going to stay a toxic environment. They're not going to change because of anything you say on the way out the door. That's the reality. So you have nothing really to gain, but everything to lose. And that's why I and many other people recommend that you don't do exit interviews. Some people say you could do it, but, just keep your comments very high level, very professional. It's like, okay, I suppose if you can do that reliably and you're not going to be baited into, just spilling the beans on what you really think in its full unvarnished glory. You know what I mean? If you can bring yourself to that, then sure. If you're leaving on good terms, then I suppose there's no harm in it. Just as I said, still, you don't want to disclose full and complete information of exactly where you're going and who you're reporting to and what their phone number is and, the recruiter you're dealing with and all that kind of stuff. Just a bad idea. So there you go. That's what I have to say on that. Anyway, we've got 18 people here. Get in the chat. Let me know what your questions are. This is basically just a live Q&A. I have no pre-prepared thing that I'm going to talk about. I'm just here to answer your questions. So give me some questions, whatever you're wondering about, whatever you're struggling with. That's what this is for. So there you go. This is the first week on this new schedule, new live stream schedule that I'm on. So I used to do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, starting an hour later than I have done this week. This week it's Wednesday, Thursday, and it's pushed forward an hour. So we're still evaluating if this makes any sense to do this. So this is normally I'm not live on Thursdays, but thank you for joining me today. I don't know if you guys are only here at this time. But yeah, while we're waiting for the questions to roll on in, just as a reminder, check out this course if you want to go deeper with me and learn how to get a job. Get this course is my Get Hired course. It's linked in the description box below this live stream. And I've also linked a video describing the course, so it's as transparent as possible. And what it tells you how to do, what it teaches you how to do, is how to get hired on the posted job market with all the jobs that are posted publicly, and how to get hired on the hidden job market, which is all the jobs that are not posted publicly but are still there. And if you didn't know it already, 80% of the jobs that are out there are not posted. You don't have to take this from me if you've never heard this before. Go do your own research. That's what I'm trying to get people to do. That's the reality. 80% of jobs are not posted. There's some disagreement of exactly if it's 70% to over 80%. In my experience, it feels like about 85%, but nevertheless, that's what it is. When I was a hiring manager, I hired a lot more people, without posting the job than I did with a public job posting. So let's see here. It's not record, not reward. The first person to get into the chat is Illa Panchuk, who says, little off topic, have you considered also streaming on Twitch? No, I haven't, because I'm an old dude and I've heard of Twitch, but I have no real interest in getting into it. I know other people that stream on Twitch. For example, every 2 weeks I do a live stream with another YouTuber, and she also streams it live on Twitch. So she has her YouTube channel and she's got her Twitch channel, I guess, or whatever you call it. And she goes out live to both of those while it's also streamed on my channel too. So it's like a multicast kind of thing. So technically I'm sort of on Twitch in a sense. Somebody says, do you have any thoughts on giving out references? Which references should you choose if they, for example, want to? Well, a lot of times they'll tell you what references they want, right? Like they'll say, we would like a previous boss or a previous coworker, or, a personal reference. So a personal reference is like a friend, or possibly even family member. And, ex-coworkers make the best references. Now, the thing here is that whoever you get, whichever person you give as a reference, you should connect with them first and say, is it okay if I can use you as a reference? Can I use you as a reference? And then have them say yes. That's kind of the protocol, because you don't want to give someone that, they don't know they're a reference. So they might get a phone call out of the blue saying like, I'm calling you as a reference for this person. They go, what? Okay. Like it just doesn't make a very good impression. So ask first. Now, if they say no, then don't use them as a reference. If they say yes, now if there's any doubt, you can then ask them to say, do you think you would be able to give me a good reference? Is that something you feel able to do? And then let them say yes. Because if they say, well, I don't know, then don't use them as a reference. Okay, because you never know. They could say bad things about you, right? So if you got along with your previous boss really well, then use them as a reference. If, you had a typical relationship with them, but not overly amazing, you could still use them if they feel able to give you a good reference. But, previous coworkers are really good for that, because then they can say, yeah, I worked with this person and they're really good. So those make pretty good references, like previous bosses, previous coworkers. If you don't have anything like that, you can give personal reference. You can give, like if you've never had like a real career job or something, you're just coming out of school, you could give fellow students in your class, say like fellow student, or an instructor, if the instructor knows you and they've worked with you. They're all good candidates for that. Mellow Paulino says, how much notice is appropriate leaving a job? I've been there 3 years and am the most senior under the boss. I feel guilty giving a month after years. In most places, in most jurisdictions, that's dictated by law. Okay, so for example, where I am in Canada, in the province of Manitoba, the labor laws and the employment standards in Manitoba, it says in the law, this is how much notice you need to give. And it depends based on how long you've been there. So where I am, if you've been there less than 30 days, you don't have to give any notice. If you've been there 35 years, you have to give 6 weeks notice. So it varies. Now, I would highly recommend that you look it up. They put the laws of wherever you are on the internet, so anybody can just look it up. So I'd recommend you do that. You could ask chatbot like ChatGPT or someone. I wouldn't like necessarily trust everything that they say, but it can be a good general indicator. I would then corroborate that. If you could say, can you give me a link to the local employment standards or labor laws for this, region, wherever you are, and then you can look it up, right? That really is the way to find out. And then you know what you're doing. So you give the appropriate amount of notice. If there's any other rules there, like, for example, the employer a lot of times can pay you for the notice period and then march you right out the door as soon as you give notice. So let's say you had to give 2 weeks notice. So you want it to end in 2 weeks. So you give 2 weeks notice. You say, I'm leaving on this day, right? What sometimes they have the option of doing is they say, okay, fair enough. We're going to pay you for the next 2 weeks, but today is your last day. We don't want you working here knowing that you're leaving. Like, you're not going to care about anything you do. And, we just don't want that. So we have the option of paying you as if you worked, but then marching you out the door. So, so any rules like that, you could also see, like in the law, like what rights the employer has and what rights you have and all this kind of thing. Amazed says, some employers can be so cutthroat that completing an exit interview makes little difference. That said, I agree that opting out is the safer choice. I don't know what you mean by being cutthroat, like in the sense that they're going to put the screws to you and like almost do like a stress interrogation or something. Like, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, like, you know, it's hard in these situations, I think, for most people, because, you know, emotions run high. If you're leaving, it could be for personal reasons. You probably had an issue with somebody there or whatever, you know. So when they bring you in and do a closed door meeting with you and ask you all about it, you know, and maybe like, you know, almost accuse you of stuff almost, it can be very tense. Some people are not great. They can't keep their cool under those things. They start blurting out all kinds of stuff. Sometimes HR intentionally behaves a certain way to get you to drop the defenses and give it to them straight. And, you know, it could be to your detriment to do that. It could get you into some hot water. If you start talking about discrimination, if you start talking about harassment, if you start talking about, you know, like there's legal issues potentially in some of these things. So you just got to be careful what you say. And that's why, you know, I recommend just don't do them. You know, it could be perfectly harmless, but it's safer if you just don't. You know what I mean? Especially if you're leaving on bad terms. Somebody that says Zimbabwe and best friend says, today we can only ask questions related to exit interviews only. You can ask questions about anything. I was just kicking it off talking about exit interviews. If people wanted to engage with that, we can talk about it. If people want to talk about some other aspect of careers or employment or business, we could talk about that too. Kaiko says, hi, just joined the live stream. Can I get a recap on missed discussion around the stream topic? No. Rewind, go back to the beginning and listen to it, because there's people here that have already heard it, and I want to talk to them about it. I want to move forward. Yeah, but that being said, that's the last question. I haven't received a more recent question than that. So the bottom line is just don't do them, you know, for exit interviews. It's just a well-known thing. That's what a lot of people recommend. I agree with them. You know, especially if you're leaving on bad terms, especially if, you know, there's issues of you possibly can't keep your cool and behave professionally. Like if they're really trying to pick at you and get an emotional reaction, you know, and you feel you could, that could be successful with you, all the more reason to avoid it. Spearhead Global says, I have a case study interview next week in one of the MBBs, whatever the hell that is. Kinda anxious. Okay, well, best of luck. If you have any questions about them, about whatever the MBB is, let me know. Don't use acronyms when you're talking to people in a different industry around the world. It's just not a good idea. They won't know what acronyms. Everybody works in their own little industry and they think that their acronyms are universal. They're not. Okay, they're highly individualized and specific to industries and countries, you know, sometimes. So, yeah. Like, for example, when you say MBB, I think Master Black Belt. You know, that's a Master Black Belt of Lean Six Sigma. So that's what I think, but I'm sure that's not what you meant. Yeah, you know, this is the thing. Like, a lot of people don't understand business, which is perfectly forgivable, you know, but yet they're not ever taught about it, you know, so when they come to get a job, they don't understand what the hell's going on. And it's not helped by the fact that it's very competitive. So anything that's competitive means that anybody's going to get any advantage that they can get. They're going to take any advantage that they can get. And so, you have all kinds of conflicting incentives. What, say, a recruiter wants to do is a recruiter wants to take every candidate and put them on a level playing field and compare apples to apples, and do this. Now, is that to your best interest? Usually not. It's hard to go up against like 800 people on a level playing field and beat them all. It just is. Most people are going to have an issue with that. It's also kind of stupid because there isn't just one metric to measure how good somebody is at a job. For example, somebody could be the best technical worker around, but they're impossible to deal with. You would never want to collaborate with that person. You would never want them on your team, but they might be the most knowledgeable person, right? On the other hand, you might have somebody else that maybe is not the most knowledgeable person, maybe not the most hardworking person, but they're the person that everybody wants on their team, right? You would like to collaborate with them. They bring out the best in you. They make you feel good about yourself, and they help others to get the work done. You know what I mean? So what do you like imagine you were a recruiter. What would you screen for, knowing that there's like more than one thing that is good, right? A really great employee could be like different things, right? So that level playing field, is that fair? Everybody's obsessed with fair. Well, no, of course not, because different people have different traits and there's different ways of measuring people, So, and then you factor in the fact that we're not really measuring people. We're measuring the first impression perception of what they're like. You know what I mean? So that just makes it like an impossible task. And this is the reality of recruitment and selection for employees. It's that, spotting talent is extremely hard at the best of times. These people are trying to do it on a budget with entry-level employees, because that's what most recruiters are. So good luck, you're not going to get anything approaching effective with that. And this has been known for a very long time. This has been studied in universities and business school, how ineffective HR is at picking winners. The problem is that we don't have any practical alternatives. That's the problem for employees. Spearhead Global says McKinsey, Bain, I guess Boston Consulting Group, management consultancies. Okay. So we have a case study interview next. What's a case study interview? I know what a case study is, and I know what an interview is. It's obviously some specific thing to these large corporate management consulting companies. Well, I hope you get it. Amaze says, I typically give 2 weeks notice when resigning. When would an immediate resignation be ideal, particularly if the job is toxic and there's a risk of retaliation or termination? Well, kind of based on what I was saying earlier, no, because like I said, in most places, that's governed by law. How much notice you're supposed to give is governed by law. Now, if you just quit, you still can. They're not going to throw you in jail or anything, but there's consequences to that. The employer doesn't have to pay you quite the same, or there's other things in there. So that's part of it. Now, Mellow Mallow Paulino has sent a super chat. Thank you, my friend. It says, is it smarter to fight the good fight for the work culture or leave a toxic workplace and start from scratch? Well, my friend, that is a judgment call. I can tell you my personal opinion on that, but obviously it varies by the details of the situation, and it depends on the individual. Different people will have, what's right for people will change depending on the person, right? So personally, for what it's worth, I have left a few employers because of what I felt was a toxic culture. Okay, now the problem with toxic workplace, toxic culture is that it's very much a judgment call. Sometimes you're not having a good time, so you call it toxic, So I have done that. I've done that about 3 or 4 times, actually. That's the reason why people leave jobs, is because mainly it's a people issue. That, at least in my experience, I mean, I've worked across 5 industries. I can do many different things and I'm happy. But what really makes or breaks it is the people you have to deal with, how understanding they are, how easy they are to deal with, things like this. So yeah, I actually left a job because of a boss, and then I went and took another job, and then the boss followed me. So they became my boss a second time in a second place. What are the odds, huh? This is the problem about working in the same industry, right? So that's 2 of the 4 places I've left doing that. So it's really 3 people. Now listen, sometimes the situation is salvageable because it's just a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. Okay, now, one of the things that people do in management, or at least they're supposed to be doing, upper management, is they're supposed to be very good at conflict resolution, okay? And I have been also in many other situations where I've had issues with other people or whatever, but I've been able to patch it up. And sometimes it comes to a head, but it's like when they ask you in a job interview, they say, like, any question they ever ask you in a job interview about conflict, like, how do you resolve conflict? How do you handle conflict? The answer is always communication. And in the real world, that's how we resolve conflict. It's always something to do with communication, some form of communication. So sometimes, instead of like sitting in offices and sending stupid little emails to other people, like they do in large enterprise, they think that that's how the world runs. It doesn't. That's how large organizations run. That's large organization culture. What they do in smaller organizations, generally speaking, is you go and you talk to the person face to face. And that alone can resolve a lot of issues. If you get 2 people sitting down together, where like one person can't get up and leave, that goes a long way to resolving whatever issues there might be. Maybe the other person doesn't respect you. Maybe their communication style to you pisses you off. Maybe they're asking you to do something that you claim is impossible, or it's not possible to do that, and they view your explanation as an excuse, or they just seem to think you're lazy because, like whatever the issue is, you get both people speaking face to face. That solves about 3/4 of the conflicts, whether you address the issue. Also understanding how to do that and saying, like, this is how, when you say that, this is how it lands for me. This is what I'm hearing. I assume you're referring to this and this and this. So when you say that, that's how I'm reading it. I'm not sure if that's how you intended it, but that's the impression you're making with me, and things like this. And then a lot of people go, oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not how I meant it. What I meant simply was this. So I apologize if that came, like stuff like that. If 2 people want to resolve it, you can. And that's a whole thing. So I've left 3 times over like 35 years or whatever, but there's been many other times when you can patch things up by doing that type of thing. So once again, I'd say it's up to the individual. Okay, I know that's probably not very helpful, but everybody has to decide for themselves, like what they're prepared to put up with, if they consider the payoff worth the trouble. You know what I mean? That's a very individual thing. It depends what your ambitions are, and it depends what alternatives you have. So there we go. Thank you for the super chat. Okay, my buddy there, Zimbabwean best friend, Why do companies interview candidates, reject everyone, then repost the same job instead of hiring somebody? There's a variety of reasons. Number one, it could be complete incompetence. They don't have a clue what they're doing. That is something that does happen. Number two, it could be that the right candidate hasn't come along. That's more rare, okay? Another reason is because there's something weird going on. It could be a form of industrial espionage, which I've seen, where, they're trying to get some very specific information, maybe like how much a competitor is paying their employees. So what they'll do is they'll post a job for a very specific, role, and they'll try and get the competitor's employees to apply for it. And then in the job interview, they'll ask them stuff like, what is your current salary and what do they get you to do? And, like all this kind of stuff. And the employees in that situation will disclose fully, like, here's what they pay me and here's what my whole job is and here's what I'm expected to know and do and blah, 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 blah. And they go, okay, thank you. So you know what you're doing. And then there is no job. It was just some kind of intelligence operation to figure out what your competitors are doing. I've seen that. Or they're just doing some silly, retarded study of what's going on in the labor market. That also is a thing. So to see like what people are out there, what skills do they have, what are they prepared to work for, like in terms of compensation, this kind of thing, right? So they among other things, they can evaluate their compensation structure for all their different roles, things like this. There's a variety of things going on there. Ilya Panchuk says, okay, but first impressions can tell a lot. If you are nervous, you probably are shy and other stuff you can tell. Okay, was that part of a previous discussion? Yeah, well, so you're nervous, okay? If you are expected to, if you're expecting that, generally speaking, you can go and, do a job interview or something and you're nervous as hell and you're shy and you don't do as well, but people will overlook that and say, oh, well, I know they did terrible, but I'm sure they're good, so we're just going to regard them as good. It's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. The way you address it is you conquer your nerves and you conquer your shyness with a bit of confidence. And the way you get confidence is through practice. And, you practice something over and over and over again, you get better at it. Practice makes perfect, and after you practice and you get better at something, knowing that you're better and seeing that you get better results, that makes you feel more confident about your ability to do that. This is a journey that everybody is on in their lives. Unfortunately, for us introverts, you have to interact with other human beings to make things happen. The more people you interact with, the more things happen for you. That's the nature of human society, and even the law of the jungle, the more people you have with you and that and you understand how to deal with and that like you, the better things happen. Right? And there's a lot of introverts out there, and I'm speaking from experience when I was very young. There's a lot of introverts out there that don't understand this and don't respect it. They think that, interpersonal skills are stupid and they're not necessary. And usually they learn the hard way in life when they're checked and opportunities don't come to them. They come to other people because you don't respect this. You don't develop your skills. Job interviews are one of many examples where that's apparent. It's like the more confident you are at giving an interview, the more you know the answers, the more you've conquered your nerves and you're able to speak clearly to people even when you're nervous a little bit, the better you'll do and the better things will happen. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm not saying that it should be like that. I'm saying it is like that. We have a choice to adapt to this or not, and that's the reality. Now, this is just my personal opinion. I'm not forcing it on everybody. I'm just saying, but that's like, look at that pattern. If that's what it seems like to you, then the way to solve this particular problem is to practice things like interviewing technique. The more of it you do, the better you get, and the more things will generally go your way. And I want you to succeed. I want you to kick ass. I want you to be able to do an interview for whatever job it is that you're wanting and that you can do. And I want you to get it. And this is what I believe is the way to do that. It's worked for me. It's worked for many, many other people that I've helped. I've taught this in universities, and it seems to have an effect. So that's what I'd recommend. Spearhead Global says, in some environments, a toxic culture can create faster room for advancement if you're highly aggressive and know how to navigate it. Yeah, great. So I'll tell you what, why don't you create the most toxic environment ever and expect good things? But it ultimately depends on both the individual and what they actually mean by toxic. Exactly. So now we can have a philosophical debate on what toxic is. Jack White says, is this the you got to say the Jack White. The Jack White. What's the time range for job interviews from start to finish when an offer is received? What's a time range for job interviews from start to finish when an offer is received? I don't know, anywhere between 5 minutes and 3 years, somewhere in there. E.g., I'm finished final rounds with 2 multinational firms for director level roles, and it has been 2+ months. There is no answer to that. It highly depends on what job you're talking about. You can show up to a store that has a help wanted sign in the window and say, hey, I understand you're looking for help. Putting the help wanted sign. I can do this, I can do that. They go, okay, great, you're hired. Let's, can you start now? Right? It can be very short or it can be years, depending on what's going on. So there is no standard thing. The only relevant issue is how much time you are willing to devote to something, right? Now, what I would say, as a general guide, if it were me, is I would say this. Do you have anything better to do, right? If you have interviews left, right, and center, and you've got a couple of job offers that have been sent to you, and you've got those in your back pocket, then it doesn't make sense to entertain these people's request for yet another interview after months and months of dealing with them, does it? But in the absence of anything else, if this is the only lead you have, I would say entertain it. You have no control over their process, and you will have no way of knowing what they're doing behind the scenes. So don't try and agonize or rack your brain trying to figure out what their thought processes are and what their hiring process is. Just if they want to do an interview with you, if you have nothing else going on, I would say do it, But if you have a lot of other irons in the fire and they look a hell of a lot more promising, then it makes sense to prioritize these things and not worry about this if it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. I once did 9 interviews for a job that I had eventually got, but would I recommend that? No, it turned out to be a terrible company. I was only with them 18 months. You know what I mean? So yeah, their process does have some correlation with the culture of the company. Let's see. Mellow Paulino says, what is your approach when confronting someone on their personal hygiene? Oh, okay. There's an interesting HR question. I fortunately haven't had to do that. I have been tempted when I was for a couple of years, I went back teaching in academia, and it was with students in my class who it felt like were not wearing any kind of deodorant, So when they come next to you to ask a question, it's that's honestly the only time I've dealt with that. I've never dealt with that in any kind of business environment, personally. I have had to deal with people wearing inappropriate clothes, like pants with big holes in it and stuff like that, because they were worn, but not the personal hygiene thing. So anyway, what I would do for that is basically talk to them one-on-one in private. Don't do it in front of everybody else. Don't do it in a public place. Don't do it with other people around. And just say, listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about, matters of personal hygiene. Might I recommend using a deodorant? It might, work better for you, or at least it would work better for other people around you. And I don't think I would do this. I would think twice about doing it if I was the only one that had a problem with the person. If I had received complaints or heard comments from other people, then I would say this is something I've heard. It's not just me. I've heard comments from other people, or I've had complaints from other people. I highly recommend you do this, and then this doesn't become an issue. And that'll be that. And then I'd let them say their piece, whatever it is, and then it doesn't change anything. Probably something like that. Pedro Lima says, what to do when someone make you an offer, you accept it and give notice, and then the company alter the offer conditions with no discussion? Well, unfortunately, that's the risk you run. Anytime you leave something to go for something else, you do run that risk, So there's not much you can do in the moment other than say, if they send you like a counter offer or something, you say, well, this was not what we had agreed. What I did agree to was this. Now, first of all, it goes without saying that if something isn't in writing, it essentially doesn't exist. Verbal contracts and stuff, they don't count. They don't matter what somebody says. What matters is what's in writing. So you would not quit your job if you're working. You would not quit your job on the basis that somebody gives you a verbal offer and they says, "Oh yeah, we'll hire you." It's like, yeah, don't quit your job. You need to get a signed document. I mean, even then, it's not guaranteed, but it goes a lot further to making it real, right? Then, unfortunately, there's not too much you can do in the moment. The only thing you can do is say, well, this is not what we agreed to. What I agreed to was X, X, and X. Now, can you send me an offer for that? And then if you do, I'll sign it and send it right back to you, and then we're good. But you can't force their hand in this situation. You just can't. So, all the effort should be in going to prevention rather than managing it once it occurs, right? So, for example, if you're working at company A and you get an offer from company B, you would do your research on company B. Do they have a history of, changing offers on people? Do they have a history of treating people badly and getting away with it, not caring about, not honoring their word, and all this kind of stuff? Is there a history? Are there a lot of complaints for this company? Do you know anybody? Have you checked references on the company? If you're going to quit a job over taking an offer from a company, it might be an idea to check in with a couple of people that have worked for that company and ask them and say, like, do these people keep their word and all this kind of stuff? And, if you hear anything negative, you might want to think twice about it. So unfortunately, there's not too much you can do in the moment. But listen, don't take my word for that. Just verify that. Go and check with the local employment authority, okay? Wherever you are in the world, you have laws that govern labor, like employment, right? They can be called employment standards, they can be called labor laws, whatever. And there will be some department of the government whose job it is to police those, right? So if they make a law saying companies have to do this, there will be a branch of the government, like usually part of the police, that enforces that, right? It's usually in a government building downtown. It's like one department or something. And You can usually find their website. It'll have usually a phone number where you can call them and ask questions. You can also blow the whistle on companies anonymously a lot of times. You can say, I don't want to give you my name, but I'm just letting you know that this company is doing this. You might want to investigate. Goodbye. That kind of stuff. So, those people do exist, and they are an authority, and you can ask them questions. You could say, here's my deal. This is what I've done. This is what they've done. Now, what are my options? And, these people have the power to shut down any employer if they want to, and where I am, they do it occasionally. They don't have any qualms about going in and, shutting down a big company because they're violating employment law. So they are a resource for you. So I'd recommend that you find them wherever you live in the world, find the local people that do that, and use them as a resource. Notice, and then the company alter the offer conditions. Yeah, okay, so Melly Malapolio says, thank you for the great advice. Well, thank you. And thank you all again for the super chat earlier. Mohammed says, I made a technical interview week ago, and the interviewer explicitly said, we will make you an offer. How long usually do they take to send you an offer? My friend. Like I just said, anything verbal is non-binding, unfortunately. So they may not send you an offer. It might be coming, or it might not. And if it is coming, the length of time will vary, because in large organizations, depending on how it works, the offer can get written up by different people from the recruiter who's interviewing you. That doesn't always work like that, but it can, and they might need to check things first. So there could be a delay, and they could be backlogged. The person could be on vacation. There could be a bunch of things. But it could also be that they're just not doing it. I know you're aware of that. I'm just saying, if they send you an offer, great. If they don't, unfortunately, then this might have to be a learning experience. Don't take anything anyone says for granted. Verbal stuff doesn't matter. They can promise the earth and the sky and then just not deliver, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay? The only time something becomes sort of real is when it's in writing, when they've sent you an offer, an official offer. That's the only time it becomes real. So until that point, just regard it as just talk. It's encouraging, but it's just talk. I'm sorry to say. Pedro Lima says, I'm currently looking for a first full-time job, and I'm having moderate success applying. I got 5 offers out of 15 recruitment processes in Portugal. I saw a lot of your videos and I love your content. Well, thank you. I'm glad that things are going well for you, Pedro Lima. And thank you for coming back and telling me. That's great. We've reached the end of the questions here. Just a reminder to everybody, if you want to go deeper with me, check out this course. It's linked in the description box below. All my advice in one place. How to get a job in the hidden job market and how to get a job in the posted job market. Of the two of those, the hidden job market is by far the most valuable because there are 5 times the amount of jobs there. And as an added bonus, there's substantially less competition. So, and then if that wasn't enough, usually the jobs on the hidden job market end up being better jobs. So, to me, it's a no-brainer. That's where most people should look. That's where you should focus most of your efforts. So if you're not doing that, I highly recommend you do. Don't take my word for any of this. Go out, do your own research, see that this is true, because it is, and then come back if you want help on being able to do that. But this is a very popular course, so check it out. And also, I have this course if you want to learn business, best bang for the buck around. Learn anything you will learn in a university 2-year brick and mortar program for a Master's of Business Administration. You can learn anything in this course that you can learn in that for a tiny fraction of the price. And this one here, if you want to improve your communication skills, not just writing, even though it's called Write Like a Professional, not just writing, but like all-round communication skills, check out this course. This will really help you if you want to improve your communication skills. The net effect is that when people deal with you, you will make a much better first impression. They will recognize you as somebody with a lot of potential and maybe somebody who needs to be moved upwards if it's like a promotion type situation. So check that out. These are all linked in the description box below, and these all have videos accompanying them that you can watch that describe the course, how it works, what you get, so it's as transparent as possible. So check that out. Yep, still waiting for questions. We got 19 people here. Thank you for being here. This is the first week on my new schedule. So I'm streaming on Thursdays, which I didn't used to do. It was Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm pretty much resigned to streaming on Wednesdays and Thursdays, but the time is still a little up in the air. I might move my streams forward by an hour. We'll see. There's some question of whether that makes sense or not. Gary says, what should one do if the exit interview in a requirement for post-employment compensation? I guess you mean is a requirement for post-employment compensation. Okay, first of all, you need to be careful because employers will say all kinds of crap, right? Legally, they may not have the right to do that. It depends. There's going to be some legal requirements of what they need to pay you, and that's not negotiable for them. They need to do it because the government holds them to that. If you are owed compensation as per the law of the land, they can't withhold it for any reason, including not doing some retarded exit interview they just cooked up. On the other hand, if they are paying you above and beyond what the law requires, you know, they're giving you like a severance pay and like it's well above what they need to do legally, and that is written into your employment contract, then you need to do it. But remember, they just can't make up rules on the spot. A lot of organizations just assume that employees haven't read the rule book, they haven't read their employment contract, they don't know their rights, they don't know the laws, and they take full advantage of that by telling you stuff that's false. So just make sure as a first step that it is in fact legitimate what they're saying, okay? Because I have heard that one before. And the reason they say it is because they know that nobody's going to do it, right? So they make up some effing BS about like, oh, you know, it's mandatory. It's like, no, it isn't. Give me a break, you know? In fact, you know, me talking to you is not mandatory right now. You just turn around and walk away. So ask them, why is it, how is it mandatory? Where is that written down? You know, if they say that right to your face, that would be the immediate response. The next thing would be to check the laws if you really don't want to do it. Now, forgetting about that. Okay, let's say you're going to do it. Go do the exit interview and say nothing. You know, why are you leaving? Oh, just time for a change. You know, did you have a problem with anyone here? No. Do you have an issue with the way the company does business? No. You know, where are you going? Oh, I don't know. Who's your contact to helping you get the job that you're going to? Oh, I can't remember. You know, two can play this game, right? So it also depends on whether you're leaving on good terms or not. I'm assuming you're not leaving on good terms because you're bringing up this issue. You know, so just go there and do your best to be as stoic as possible. Don't let these clowns bait you into losing your cool and then, like, you know, having this whole tirade of, you know, your opinions about your boss and your coworkers and the company and all that just come out, because that can get you into a lot of hot water. If you go to an exit interview, you mention harassment, you mention you know, workplace violence, you mention you know, other type things. These are legal issues. they can get you into hot water legally, So just go and button your lip. Don't say anything remotely incriminating or controversial about anyone or negative about anyone. Answer questions from a very high level, like 30,000 foot level, and just don't allow yourself to be baited or goaded into losing your cool or talking all about stuff that you don't want to talk about. Okay? And then you can avoid this whole issue. Kaiko says, does it come off as pushy to go out of your way to follow up with the company post-interview? Or is doing that actually a positive, assuming you're professionally communicating? No, it doesn't come off as pushy at all. I mean, it depends what you say, but if you know what you're doing, it shouldn't come across as pushy. What you do, if you send a thank you, okay, here's what I recommend. If you do a job interview, okay, whether it's in person or it's remote, it's on a Zoom call or something, okay? And let's say there were two people on the other end. There was a recruiter and there was a hiring manager, okay? Now, ideally, you would know who these people are, so you know their names. What I'd recommend is you send a thank you note to each person separately. That's what I recommend, okay? And it would go something like this. It would say, hello, I just want you to know, it was a pleasure meeting you yesterday or earlier today. You guys made a really good impression on me, that your organization would be, great to work for. And then I would insert a line that's customized where if they did anything for you, no matter how small, you bring that up. And you show appreciation. You say, I really appreciated how you explained the structure of the interview at the very beginning, so I knew what to expect. That really helped me understand the process and do and sort of do a good job. Most people don't do that, but you did that, and that really made a difference, right? And then that's all. That's all you need to say. Just thank you very much. I look forward to speaking to you again. I hope to speak to you again in the near future. Have yourself a great day. Something like that. There's absolutely nothing inappropriate or pushy doing that. In fact, people will appreciate that, and it signals that you care. And putting one line in there that's you took the trouble to think of something that they did, and then you tell them, yes, you did do this. And I did appreciate that, and maybe even a reason why, because then the person reads it, they go, well, thank you. You're welcome. My pleasure, right? It makes them feel good about you, and that's the whole point. So absolutely nothing wrong doing that. In fact, I recommend it. Send the thank you note the same day or the next day at the latest. Okay, going forward, because then they remember. They have it in here. They remember who you are. They just spoke to you. So, yes, do that. It's not pushy to do that. It is never pushy to say thank you for something genuine, right? I appreciate the interview, and I appreciate what you did personally when you offered me a drink when he came in. That was very hospitable of you, and it made me feel welcome. That's all. Thank you. Have yourself a great day. Something like that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. That endears you to people. And it's not ingratiating because you are talking about something real. You're not just making up something and something nice and saying it to somebody. You're bringing up something that actually happened and that they did. Pedro Lima. What to do when a big company makes a verbal offer, you accept and then goes back to you with a lower offer after discussing with the executive level. Is this normal procedure? It's normal. It's not very welcoming. It's starting off on the wrong foot. But they do it because they can. So listen, if you are fortunate enough to be in the situation where you're already employed and like this is like a job offer you got, you don't need to take this, then you don't have to accept it. Just say, no, I'm sorry. What was agreed was this number. So, I took the job on that basis. So if you can change the number back to this, then I can sign it and I can return to you. If not, then my favorite line, I'll get back to you, which of course means I will never get back to you, you effing charlatan. Okay, so unfortunately, if you don't have a plan B or an option B at the moment, you have two options. You have this offer or unemployment, and unemployment is no longer acceptable, then unfortunately you don't have a lot of bargaining power in that situation. That's the reality. Negotiation is based on having options, and if you don't have any other options besides unemployment, which is unacceptable, you're kind of out of options. You have to take it, unfortunately, and that's why they do this. What they're doing, at least to me, how I would interpret that is you're signaling that, okay, I see what this is. This is not a place I'm going to be for the long term, because the very first thing we're doing is you're breaking your word. Okay, that's the way that you guys feel is an appropriate way to start off in your relationship with me. Okay. Message received. So I'll take the job and then I'll continue my job search. Is kind of, and I'm not the only one that thinks that way. It's just poor taste. This is part of business. People, like HR is the biggest culprit for this. They are schizophrenic. On one hand, they regard humans, like employees, as resources that you don't need to consider. They're exactly the same as inventory or property, plant, and equipment or any other resource. So you can treat them as such. Okay. But then they also at the same time regard them as human beings because they have conflicts and emotions, and you need conflict resolution and you need motivation and all those human elements, right? And the problem is that they can't reconcile in their mind which one it is. So one moment they'll talk to you like a human being and try to convince you that they care about you. And then in the next moment, they'll send you like a contract written in legalese informing you of a new company policy, Like, which is it? Do you care about me or not? So that's what's going on here. It's the same form of that. We want motivated people that want to be here, but yet the first thing we're going to do is we're going to piss you off and show that you can't trust us. But then we expect you to still behave like, you're motivated and that, you want a good working relationship with us. It's schizophrenic. It's stupid. This is what happens when you have multiple departments all dealing with the same person. One, like the hiring manager wants to hire you, but then the HR department makes you the offer and negotiates with you. This is what you get. This is the other reason why big companies fail, why they haven't taken over the world, and why most business is still done in small business, because this is this is what sours you from them and why they can't hold on to employees. Large organizations have economies of scale. They've got a lot of things going for them, but this is where you see their weakness, this schizophrenia, and how they treat you. Just like our good friend earlier that's talking about, how great a toxic environment might be because it motivates people. It's like, okay, yeah, let's see if the pros outweigh the cons on that one. Oh, we don't need to see, because we can have just observed the world and look at history. Unfortunately, you get certain industries where people are still stubbornly laboring under this delusion that that's the best way to operate, because they see a few results that are locally optimal. They assume that, oh, okay, systemically it's the right way to go. It isn't. Okay, where were we here? what to do when a big company makes a verbal offer, you accept it. Then we did that. Gary says, thank you. You're welcome, Gary. Jack White, how common is it when an employer asks a candidate to prepare a presentation? Okay, this is a new one. How common is it when an employer asks a candidate to prepare a presentation? And what do you think of this task in the interview process? Okay, well, personally, I actually think it's good, because instead of having you sit down and talk about how awesome you are, here's a chance to show them how awesome you are. Okay, so if you really know a topic or, something like that, this is your opportunity to show them. Okay, now, I know it's more work, so that sucks. But if it's a job that you really want, and you're prepared to put an effort into it to get it, okay, if that's the case. And secondly, you're a person that feels that you're better at demonstrating your value than you are about making representations of it. You know what I'm saying? That's what I used to find absolutely maddening about job interviews, like in my early career. It's like you have to sit there and talk about how awesome you are. And you're like, look, I'm an awesome employee. I know this material really well. I've done a lot of good work. The problem is these people can't ask anyone that has ever worked with you, outside of references, but usually that comes later. So it's like, well, we don't know you. We don't know anyone you know. We don't know anyone that's seen you work. Convince us you're awesome. And it's like, okay, I can't do any of the work to show you. I have to sit here and talk about it. I don't know what to say, I mean, what? I'm organized. I do high quality work. I mean, if you don't believe me when I say that, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So when they ask you to give a presentation or to give like a demonstration in some way, for that type of person, it might be a good thing. So depending on what the details are, that's what I think about it. Now, I'm sure that is going to vary considerably by person and by situation, but that's what I think of it in general. Melly Malo Polino says, I once had a subordinate get an official big promotion offer, and the company turned and hired someone else. They said sorry and moved on quickly. Yeah, well, I'm not sure what the relationships are between like you and the company and the employee and all this, but yeah, that's the problem with big companies. And it's also a problem of like these lower management levels where you're not really a manager, you're a glorified supervisor. So like you might have direct reports, but you don't have the power to discipline them. You don't have the power to hire them. You don't have the power to fire them. It's like you're not a manager, in essence. So it's weird I've had that too, where you have direct reports, people that report to you. Technically you're responsible for them, but you can't discipline them, you can't hire them, you can't fire them. You know what I mean? Like you have no real power to do anything. But yet you're responsible for them. It's like the worst of both worlds, It's like I don't mind being responsible for people, but they have to do what I say. If they have to do what I say, I have absolutely no problem being totally accountable for these people. But when they don't have to listen to me, but yet I'm responsible if they do something wrong, that's a stupid situation. I remember that was like the first career job I had was like that. It was a ridiculous situation. So I don't know if that's what you're describing. If it is, my heart goes out to you, because that's a lot of times that's a no-win situation. Pedro Lima says, I agree. What do you believe is the best thing one can do when starting a new job? I think across the board, the best thing you can do is when you're new, like the first, few weeks, is check in with your immediate boss. And then if that person is different than the one who hired you, check in with them too, the one who hired you. Like maybe every Friday right after lunch, which is a good time in the week to go and talk to somebody, knock on the boss's door, if they have an office or something, just say like, you got a minute, and then, they say, sure, come on in. So you come in, you close the door, you say, so how am I doing? Is there something that, I'm doing that you would like me to do differently? Like this kind of thing. Just checking in, right? Because a lot of times the boss will say, oh, actually, now that, like, I think you're doing fine, but now that you mentioned that, minor point, instead of doing it this way, can you do this other thing this way? And he's going, yeah, sure, no problem. So it does two things. Number one, it helps you to do better, to meet their expectations. So you know that you're working out. And then number two, it also signals back to them that you care. I care about doing well. I want to do well. I want to meet your expectations. And they see that. They go, okay, that's great. I think we're going to get along well, So to invest in things working out, I think that that's something you can do. So in the beginning, maybe like once a week, like every Friday. And then after a couple of like maybe a month or two, maybe like you back off. You don't do that once a week. Maybe once a month or twice a month, something like that. And then after 6 months, you shouldn't need to do that really anymore. Generally speaking, I think that's probably the single biggest important thing, or most important thing. Kiko says, is it wise to show up at an interview with printouts of your portfolio and use them to lead the conversation and show what you're good at rather than just talking about it? Yes and no. It's not stupid. But you see, generally what the interviewers think is that you shouldn't have to do that to show them that you're awesome. Right? So it's not bad. And I've done that. I brought, like, I talked about this last week. I brought, like, years ago, I had brought like 8x10, was it 8x10 or 8x11 glossy photographs of some high profile engine rebuild project I did for a locomotive company. That they wanted to know, like, can you handle this kind of scale or, whatever it was. And I said, like, well, here, I've got some, like, let me show you what I've done in the past. So it's like this massive facility, with like these huge, like, hangar sized, buildings that go on forever. It's like a manufacturing line. And saying, like, this was the project that I put into place. It was a rebuild program for, this company, blah, blah, blah. And I showed them stuff. It didn't seem to do any good. As I recall, that's my memory. I remember, I know I showed it to a bunch of people. The only one I can remember was showing it to somebody that they didn't seem impressed. So obviously it wasn't giving them what they were looking for. If you work in visual stuff, like if you're an architect or you're a graphic designer, you will, or like, I guess in fine arts for that matter, you will have like literally a portfolio. You'll have like a big kind of rectangular thing. You bring it to your interview and you can show them samples of your work, right? Like that's a known thing. So it's not stupid to bring like a little thing. It's like a sample. But just so you know, I mean, you could win the battle but lose the war. Like, yes, okay, that's all very impressive, but that's not what we care about, generally speaking, they believe that you don't need to do that to demonstrate your value. So just keep that in mind, okay? The main proof should come from your representations. That's what they're expecting. For better or worse, right? That's what they're expecting most of the time. And the other thing is that if you're dealing with a recruiter, and maybe you know this already, but if you're dealing with a recruiter works in the HR department. They don't work in the area that the job is in, right? So if you're trying to get a job as an engineer and you're doing a job interview with a recruiter, You might bring some samples of your work as an engineer and you're showing them to the recruiter. The recruiter doesn't know what the hell they're looking at. They're not an engineer. Like, wow, that looks pretty impressive. Good job. Like they don't know what they're looking at. So that's the problem. Now, if it's the hiring manager might be the chief engineer that runs the engineering department. Then they might know what they're looking at and they might go, that's pretty good. So you also got to remember who you're showing it to. Okay? And there is no hard and fast rule that it works or it doesn't. It's going to vary. But I just say, like, it's not a stupid idea, but just bear in mind that they're expecting that you can demonstrate your value without using props. That's what they're hoping for. And if you can't, that may be a red flag, depending on who it is and how they're judging the situation. Malo Polina says, it put me in the place of defending the company, and I was really on the side of the employee. So this is the person with the subordinate. Yeah, well, that's how it goes. Companies do stupid things and they leave you to be the face of the company where the rubber meets the road. If you're like junior manager, you have to be the one that breaks the news to the employee that the company decided this. It's unfortunate, but that's sometimes how it goes. The way I always used to do that is I would acknowledge, I would say, like, yeah, it's stupid. It really is unfair. Unfortunately, they have the right to be able to do this. And, unfortunately, it seems like that's what they did. So I'm sorry, man, but, that's just how it goes. So what that means for us is now this. You try and sympathize with people, empathize with people as much as possible. But unfortunately, they leave it to you to handle it a lot of times if you're the supervisor or the manager. McLovin77, is it okay to have notes with you to read off in an interview? Yes, it is. However, if you're like reading like this, you're looking down and you're reading the page verbatim, right off that's going to be a problem. If you have something on, like if you're going to a physical interview and you have like some papers on the desk, maybe your resume, maybe the job description, maybe a couple other things, that's fine. If you just glance at it, occasionally I have a second screen that, I have a camera on it here. I have a second screen. Occasionally I look at the second screen, but I don't try and do a talk like this, me reading, right off a screen or right off a page without making eye contact. That's not how you do it. But occasionally glancing at something, yes, that's perfectly fine. What I'd recommend is you go to a job interview. If it's a physical interview, you're going to their site or something, their property. Bring a few papers with you. Like I said, your resume, so you have that in front of you. So, if they're referencing something on your resume, you have your resume in front of you, you can see what they're reading off, right? A great thing to have, obviously, is the job description. And what I recommend is that you take a highlighter and highlight, the keywords under the requirements section. So when you're in the job interview, you put that in front of you. And for a variety of reasons, you're going to want to mention the stuff in the requirements section. I have this, I have that. You're looking for someone with this, I have this. You wanted someone with 5 years experience, I have 2 years experience in that, but blah, 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 insert mitigating circumstance, so that shouldn't be a problem. And you remember all the stuff on that list because you've got it highlighted. And you can reference it quickly out of the side of your eye. Just a reminder for everybody, once again, like I've talked about this before, but if you want to go deeper with me, check out that course. This course will help you. It teaches you how to get hired in the posted job market and how to get hired in the hidden job market. And that last part, that's the real gem. Most jobs are hidden. Most jobs are not posted publicly. You can get them. They're out there. You can get them. You can actually get them pretty much from the comfort of your own home if you understand how to connect with people, how to contact people, and what to say. This teaches you that. It's an open secret. I've been talking about this stuff for years. It's only recently, in the last year or so, that we've seen the posted job market shrink quite a bit because of recent global events. But the hidden job market is still going strong. So do your own research, learn all you can about it. If you want to learn all this stuff with me and how to break into it, check out that course. This course is listed in the description box. There's a link to it, and there's also a link to a video that describes it. I also have this course for learning business, best bang for the buck around. And I have this course for improving your communication skills. They are all linked below in the description. Check them out. Pedro Lima says, what to do when a recruiter suggests or flat out says that if I don't accept their offer, I might be burning bridges with them. Big company did this to me and I was baffled. Yeah, because they're idiots and they don't know what they're doing, and they're abusing their power, which, is neither here nor there, but it's another example of what we were talking about a moment ago, where somebody quits their job to take a job offer, and then the first thing is that second organization that they're moving to says, no, we're rescinding our offer, we're changing it. I know we agreed to this thing, but we're changing it now. So here's our new offer, take it or leave it. It's like they're intentionally burning their goodwill with you. This goes beyond negotiating. This is like, this is just them being jackasses for no reason. They're trying to intimidate you into doing something that's advantageous for them. And what I suspect is it's that particular HR employee or hiring manager, whoever it is, they're doing this of their own accord to make their life easier. And you're getting a really good glimpse into how they operate. They're using some real high pressure tactics here to try and get you to do something. Now, if this is a person that you have to deal with on a regular basis, then it might not be something you'd want to do because it's very cheap, and you don't have to put up with this kind of behavior in the world today. You just don't. There are a lot of other employers that don't do this kind of crap. If you have the luxury of being able to choose, you certainly don't have to accept anything like this, right? They do it because it's effective, because they can browbeat a few young, innocent people into doing what they say, but it doesn't work out in the end, not when you operate like this. You have every right to be baffled because it's stupid, Is that how you regard people that you have a long-term relationship with? Is that how you treat them? No. Only psychopaths would do that. Jack White 6 says, what do you think of sending a 30, 60, 90 degree plan with a thank you note after a deep dive interview with a hiring manager when you've also learned a lot about their needs and priorities? I would say don't do it. Did they ask for it? If they asked for it, it's maybe another matter. Don't. Because that can signal desperation. If that's not part of their standard thing that they're expecting, no. You mean well, it's a good thought. You're wanting to be helpful and you're wanting to show off your skills and use it to help them. I understand. But when you look at it through the protocol of what's going on here, it's just weird. It's a little too much. Okay? Sending a thank you note saying, thank you, I really appreciate the job. I'm looking to help out in any way I possibly can. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. That kind of thing, that's fine. But then saying, here, I've written this complete report on, what I've observed of your business, or here's the 30, 60, 90 degree plan. First of all, what's going on is probably that you think these suggestions are helpful. The reality is probably that they're not going to adopt any of those because you're missing the point, right? For example, you might do a quick tour through a facility. You might notice, okay, well, that's inefficient. That equipment needs maintenance. That person isn't following the best practice for doing that thing, and the storage of this materials is less than ideal, shall we say. So I'm going to write a laundry list of recommendations I have for you, like, oh, you need to train that person, you need to buy more racking for that inventory, you need to service that equipment, you need to do better housekeeping for all your materials lying around. In reality, what's going on is that facility, in 3 months, they're planning to remove all of that operation from that facility and implement like a lean manufacturing system or some new system, all new equipment, all new practices, that kind of thing. So you may think you're being helpful, but they're not going to take any of the suggestions because it's not like they're stupid. It's like, yeah, they know some of them. They can see some of them, but they have no intention of doing that because of some larger plan or larger issue, right? Maybe they know that those would increase efficiency, but this facility is losing money as it is. They don't have the money to make any kind of change whatsoever right now. And that's how they're thinking. Like it or not, that's how they think. So when you come in with like, oh, you should do this and this and this and this, it's like you think you're being helpful when their reaction to it is like, no, you don't get it. You don't get it. We're not doing any of this. And we don't need you to tell us these things could be different. We know that, but this is irrelevant to what we're doing. So already there's a disconnect between you and what is the way we operate. You see how that like flipped on its head, right? So for that reason, and the fact that you've got to put presumably some work into it, I would say no. You mean well, and that's really good, but it's just not the right appropriate thing to do in that situation. All things being equal, that's what I would say. Kaiko says, assuming I land the job with PricewaterhouseCoopers, I hear it's a common strategy to exit after 3 years. Would it be standard to explain your reasoning for leaving during the exit interview? Let me get this straight. So you haven't got the job yet, but you're worried about the exit interview, like in 3 years, if you stay that long, if you get the job? I think that's unanswerable, Kaiko. I'm sorry. I think there's a lot of what ifs. There's too many what ifs to make it logical to worry about that at this point. Pedro Lima says, if I had a great time meeting a team and a hiring manager, but then HR made the hiring impossible due to multiple reasons, is it okay to send an email to the hiring manager explaining the situation? No. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's not going to get you any kind of advantage. All it's going to do is say like, well, I think you're awesome, but I couldn't stand the recruiter. I can't work with the recruiter. Me working with that recruiter is going to be a problem, which suggests that you working with anybody else could be a problem. So now you look like you're a problematic person. Even if they agree with you that this HR person is kind of, a bit rough around the edges, sending that is not going to do you any good. So if you can't take the job, move on. Like, don't waste any more time dealing with these idiots. Move on. They obviously have, a totally repulsive HR person that's driving good employees away. They apparently think this is good to operate like that. Let them think that, let's see what happens. Let's see if success, comes of this, right? You move on to people that appreciate you and that you can deal with, and let them worry about this situation that they're in. Okay? You are free, my friend. If you're not going to take the job, none of this matters. Put them behind you and keep moving forward. We're coming up to the end of this. Not to hit this super hard all the time, but check out my courses. This, and this. This is the one that everybody here is probably more interested in. So check it out. It can really help you. Last call. It's linked in the description box below. Check it out. Very popular course. I think something like 800 people have taken this one so far. So it helped them. It can help you. It contains all my advice, and it can open a lot of doors for you. So check it out. Okay, we're going to just wrap this up. The last couple of questions here. Amazed says, providing an unsolicited 90-day plan can raise unintended red flags for a hiring manager. In my case, yeah, I would believe. I mean, it sucks because somebody means well, and the hiring manager should be tuned in enough that they recognize the person means well. In my case, I believe it may have contributed to me not receiving an offer despite being a strong candidate. Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be the result. It's going to come across as like, you're reading too much into this. This is not really part of the protocol. It's like, for example, let's say you find somebody, you have a neighbor or somebody that lives next to you, and let's say you have a car, okay? And you see the neighbor down near your house or near your home, whatever, and they need a ride. So you give them a ride, right? And then the next day, the neighbor shows up, they knock on your door and they say, hey, I really appreciate how you gave me a ride. In compensation for your efforts here, I've bought you a car. It's right out front, And it's like, is that appropriate? Obviously it's a good thing. They bought you a car, but, I think a lot of people would be weirded out and they would say like, I can't accept that. That's, like I recognize that you mean well, but at the same time, it's kind of an overstep. It feels awkward, and it feels like that's not part of how this normally works. You don't need to buy me a car because I gave you a ride. Like maybe it's a bad example, but that's the effect I'm describing. That's how I think most hiring managers are going to interpret. Here, I've done this big report for you on this. There are other ways to perhaps signal your enthusiasm or your desire to be useful. Or Orenishi, if I'm saying that right, 404 says, don't give the company the satisfaction of getting better and improving, especially if they've already failed across the organization and you hated them or the job. Let them ruminate and wonder. Well, they're not going to ruminate and they're not going to wonder, but what's going to happen is they're not going to be as successful as they could have been. Now, if this is like a systemic issue, it's going to add up over time, They could be doing like 50% of the business that they could have done, because of these systemic issues easily. In fact, there's a lot of organizations that are in that position. They're doing about 50% of the business that they could have done, that they should normally do, because they've been burning their bridges with their own employees and with customers and everyone outside the organization. Pedro Lima says, again, thank you. This has been eating me. Okay. Now this was the HR issues. Pedro Lima. And that's the offer too. I might be burning bridges. And the verbal offer, and then goes back with a lower offer. Yeah, it doesn't sound like they're treating you very well. So just move on. I mean, that's my advice. If it's not going anywhere anyway, and it's just nothing but, confusion and frustration and pain, it's like, just move on from these idiots. Life is too short, Obviously, you need money, if that's the number one concern. But then Number two is to get the hell away from these people. So, if you don't have any other options but to deal with them, then you deal with them, but it's short term, and you do everything in your power to get something better, You don't have to make this horrible situation work. They are in control of the culture. They are in control of how people behave, how people communicate with each other, what they say, whether they keep their word or not, whether it's normalized. They are in control of all of that. That gets set by managers and things, They lead on that. So if that's how they want to operate, hey, all the more power to you. Best of luck. But that's not how I operate, And then you go and you find a place where it meshes more with how you operate and your values, You don't want to go insane and lose your mental health trying to work with these people, over the long term. Pedro Lima says, yeah, I have another good offer. Thanks to God and your videos, but it is a smaller company. Why does God get billed before my videos? That's what I want to know. That's unacceptable. Now, it's fine for you to use a lowercase g when you refer to God, but not when you use a lowercase v in that sentence. Okay? So just let's be clear about this. I'm kidding, of course. Thank you, Pedro Lima, for some very high praise. Thank you to everybody who participated today. You guys are awesome. I wish you the absolute best. If you do have questions, I will be back next week, Wednesday and Thursday, with some more live streams. So come back, and if you want to get into some issues that you're having, we can kick it around. Check out my courses, check out my videos, check out my other channels. Go and subscribe to these and check out some of the videos there. And I will see you guys soon. Take care.